Good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar update, Setting the Record Straight on 2G, 3G, and 4G, sponsored by Telguard. I'm Jacqueline Shawn, Marketing Manager for the Electronic Security Association. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. All callers will be muted for the duration of the webinar, so please be sure to use your question or chat log to submit your questions, and all questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar. Additionally, a recording of the webinar and a copy of the PowerPoint presentation will be available in the members-only resource library located at esaweb.org or upon request. Contact information will be provided at the end of the webinar. Today's webinar will be presented by Sean Welsh, Vice President of Marketing and Business Development for Tellular. Sean brings over 18 years of experience in the wireless industry to Tellular. He oversees the product marketing and business development teams, providing strategic insight and leadership. Prior to Tellular, Sean was responsible for business development and product management at Motorola. He became part of the Motorola team through the $200 million acquisition of Mesh Networks, where he led the Motorola engagement team responsible for the deal. Before his time at Mesh Networks, Sean held a number of positions at SkyTel Communications. Sean is a recognized industry leader and author and often presents at industry events. He received a BS in Computer Science from Mississippi College and an MBA from Rollins College. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Sean.
Thanks, Jacqueline, and welcome, everyone. I also want to add today that I'm going to be joined occasionally, and particularly for the Q&A section, probably most notably by Steve Fromer, who's with AT&T. So the two of us, when we get to the question and action answer portion of today's presentation, Steve will be joining me for that. So let's go ahead and get started, because as some of you may be joining us for the second look at this presentation, and others of you may have been here, this may be your first time. So we did this a couple of weeks ago, actually more like 2 months ago. And when we originally did this, this was prior to AT&T's announcement of the actual sunset date. It was an announcement that we knew was forthcoming, but at the time we just, there wasn't an official record of it. So we really went through this presentation and talked about the topics related to the sunset. So today we're going to be talking with a little bit more specificity regarding the public nature of their sunset date for their GSM or 2G network. And then we're also going to be recapping some of the topics that we talked about. I think most notably to note from the recap is, though I'm joined here with AT&T today, the original presentation was also participated in with Qualcomm. And we had a representative from Qualcomm that added a couple of extra details that I will call out specifically when we get to it. So in many of these areas, as we talk today, the topics are going to be from the industry, the cellular industry, and except where I note, they will be typically an industry viewpoint rather than a Telguard specific viewpoint. All right. So with that, let's jump right in, and let's talk about probably one of the driving definitions that we really need to focus on when we start to understand the 2G sunset, and that is where to go next, which is this concept of 3G or 4G. And you'll see why I put it in those terms here in just a moment. And the real reason is that there's a technical definition of these terms, and then there's the marketing definition of these terms. Obviously, we all know that 2G is GSM, but it also relates to some other technology types of CDMA and some, well, in particular, CDMA. Although the sunset and the terms that we'll use today, whenever we say 2G, we're going to be referring specifically to the GSM category and technology tree. For 3G, it's a UMTS base, and that was a true evolution to a completely different technical standard than the one that 2G GSM was based off of. And then we have the latest and greatest, and quite possibly what some people would say maybe even the last standard, which is 4G LTE, which all the scientists and guys that put these standards together and actually invent this stuff, this technology 4G LTE is starting to reach the theoretical limits of what's really possible for radio transmissions using in the fashion of how networks are deployed today. So we have 2, 3, and 4G LTE. And back in, not too long ago, this was a pretty clear definition of these three things. Now, I use logos, and these are the first three are, or the 3G and the 4G LTE logos with the flames. Those are AT&T's kind of branding of those. And it's important to start to look at the technical versus the branded aspect when we get into this. And I have 4G LTE also, which is Verizon's logo for that. And the reason why I'm showing the logos is T-Mobile actually did not get spectrum during the spectrum purchase round that would have enabled them to deploy a 4G LTE network in the 700 megahertz band. And when they were not able to get that spectrum, what T-Mobile decided to do is say, hey, we've deployed a new 3G technology called HSPA+. That's a faster, slightly faster version, or significantly faster version of HSPA. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to rebrand it. So they decided to simply call the latest version of 3G, HSPA+, 4G. And when that happened, obviously, you know, Steve here, sorry, Steve, but, you know, when AT&T had to certainly follow suit and not suggest that the Gs were specifically linked to some sort of significant improvement that AT&T hadn't developed. So AT&T was forced to also follow T-Mobile's marketing of HSPA+ as 4G. So unfortunately now we're left with this confusing term of 4G. In one case, it's used to mean a slightly faster version of 3G, and in another case, it's intended to indicate a truly different technology. So when you hear 4G, the key thing for you to listen for is the term LTE. If it's 4G LTE, that truly is a technology leap. If you hear just plain 4G, that's simply a faster version of 2G. Now help me, one of the other things that we really started getting into in our previous webinar with both AT&T and Qualcomm was really trying to understand where was the sweet spot when it came to the hardware and use cases for a cellular deployment. Obviously, in our context, it was security related, but you know, for those two companies in particular, they look at many different use cases, and many, you know, from energy sector through manufacturing, and many different uses where cellular equipment is applied. So the first thing that really affects us in the security industry, and something that we should all be very concerned with, is the longevity of an installation. And AT&T, as the operator of a network, obviously, and we're finding this out, you know, specifically with their announcement of the 2G sunset of GSM, that they control the technology that is actually deployed across the U.S. for their own network. So they are the ones that really determine the longevity of any particular system. Now, obviously, we as consumers ultimately drive the necessity to move from one type of technology to another, but for the most part, AT&T is the one that, as a network operator, that deploys this. And so at that time, and with Steve here with me acknowledging this as well, really the expected longevity at the time when we did the first presentation was that it was simply short. We couldn't say how short, but short was all we could say. Well, for those of us in the security industry, when, you know, we look at some of us use 5-year contracts with customers, others are on a month-to-month basis, but still certainly prefer to have, I would hope everyone expects to have customers for, you know, 5 or more years. The December 31st, 2016 date certainly puts it into a short category for our industry, being that that's only 4.5 years away. When it comes to 3G and 4G, that's where the previous slide comes into play, which is, I'm going to snap out that up there, to recall that 3G UMTS is branded 3G and 4G, right, that middle row. When we look here, they have the exact same longevity, so one does not last longer than the other. They're really two parts of the same system. one is just a slightly faster version. So they really do have identical longevity. And then when it comes to the 4G LTE, as I was saying earlier, that has an incredibly long expected life. So the first thought, I know many of your minds would be, why not simply go to LTE? Why are we even doing anything with 3G or 4G? Well, that's where the second column comes into play, of cost. Cost for these systems, certainly not only as a manufacturer as we are, but to security dealers in the ultimate cost of the hardware. It plays a critical role in where the sweet spot for technology might be found. GSM certainly has ridden a very successful run, and costs for that system are very low. Fortunately, 3G is also enjoying a very similar cost curve. So the costs for 3G hardware are typically considered low at or near the range of GSM hardware. Now, HSPA Plus, or 3G branded 4G systems, that plus effectively at the end of HSPA adds additional cost to the hardware. So to get the additional speed that 4G provides, it does come at a cost. So that's why we have that flagged here as medium. Then, unfortunately, for 4G LTE, its costs are very high. The chipset alone can at times run well over $80 just for the very smallest component before it's even built into an overall system. So that price is very prohibitive for any type of adoption within our industry, certainly at this time. So when we look at what the sweet spot is, I think it ends up obviously being pretty clear in that the sweet spot is typically found at 3G provides a great benefit both on longevity and cost. And then I think I have AT&T's agreement here that as we look at this, that the 4G longevity for their network certainly equals that of 3G's. And then to Qualcomm's component, that it's just that the hardware costs more. And I think a good illustration for this kind of, for the network and what's gone on and the inseparability of HSPA-based networks is really shown here on this slide, and I really like this analogy, so I hope you guys do too. And that is that really an HSPA-based network over the last couple of years effectively looked like this. It had several different speeds. There was HSDPA, HSUPA, there was ultimately HSPA, and each time a new technology was given a little bit faster speed, we basically got another gear on our gear shift. And then when HSPA Plus was launched, lo and behold, we got a 6th gear, right? So we have another gear. But the important thing to recognize from this image is that you can't have any one gear by itself. The entire system is inseparable from another. So there's a little bit of confusion, I feel, going on in the industry about HSPA Plus maybe having a separate and finable life as its own, that it could somehow be separated from the rest of the pack and live on its own. So, kind of to dispel that and to clearly show, I guess, an image of what that type of network would look like would be this. Not a very fun car to drive, hard to get started, and only goes in reverse is probably the only gear that you can get into. So, this is really a theoretical concept only. It's not something that would ever exist in the real world, and is also something that I know I have Steve here with me from AT&T would certainly concur that the AT&T network deployment is always going to look like this and is never going to look like this. Is that right, Steve?
Yes, that's correct.
So with that kind of basis on what 3G and 4G, and we put the slash in there because they're basically the exact same network. But as we look at 3G and 4G, let's take a look at what's happening now that we know that to 2G. Back at the beginning, or really through the end of 2011, 2G and 3G, 4G products all shared all of the national carriers' cellular frequencies equally. But so like this, like on a highway, all cars could drive in all the lanes. It was pretty much whatever frequencies you could get, or you could always take advantage of those regardless of your technology base. But nowadays, at the beginning of 2012, is where spectrum refarming really started to occur. And that's what happened. What's happening is that the 2G GSM capacity on these networks is being restricted more and more aggressively to make room for the far faster 3G, 4G devices like the iPhone and the Android devices that we're all probably utilizing. These devices consumed a tremendous amount of throughput on the network, and thus 2G really had to be shrunk in order to make room for the 3G and 4G capacity that was now required. This process is called spectrum refarming, and it's important because as this network starts to shrink, the capacity becomes less and less available for 2G devices that are being put onto the network, which is an important reason why you might want to reconsider the continued activation of 2G systems, especially in lieu of the fact that certainly this is going to occur in just 4.5 years, and that is that the 2G sunset is going to happen now. Obviously, we have a defined and known date, which is that there won't be any service after December 31st of 2016. And, I think there's one thing to hear this from a manufacturer, certainly, as we are, but then there's another to hear it from leaders in our industry and as well as the carriers themselves as it relates to the FCC's involvement in this process. In my conversations with Lou, and he gave me permission to put this quote here, is that going forward, really, that the sunsets are business decisions. And for the dealers out there that are thinking that somehow the FCC has to give its blessing in order for this to occur, that the FCC will somehow ride to the rescue and stop it from happening, it's really important to recognize that a sunset is a business decision, and it's not something that's going to be forced on them by the FCC. So just to recap some of the important parts about this section of the presentation is that 2G as a whole is being purged from AT&T's network. That is happening through spectrum refarming, and the refarming is happening immediately. And by the way, it's happening for all carriers, not just AT&T. T-Mobile also has a very public refarming effort taking place. I think it's certainly critical to understand that 2G sunset is not an FCC decision. It's a business decision. Please don't think that the FCC will ride to your rescue. And obviously we have the date here, which is that the network will no longer be available after December 31st of 2016. Now here's a topic that we didn't cover too much on our last webinar, so this material is a little bit new, and it's the concept of this double sunset. Now you guys, I know, unfortunately I can't hear the groans or the eye rolling that's going on, but I'm sure it's happening. But there is this, there is a subtlety with with cellular carriers that I think is important. Now that I think most of us all recognize and understand, I hope, the sunset is real, it's happening. Now it's time to start considering both two things: what to do about the devices that are there already deployed, and then also decisions that we have to make moving forward. And a distinction between a national carrier and a regional carrier, I think, is one that is important now for people to start to understand and to add into their mental toolkit as they're evaluating different options moving forward with knowledge of the sunset. And the most important factor is this concept of backdoor roaming. It's slang, but the term is accurate. What you have is regional carriers in the U.S. do have roaming relationships with national carriers. It's just obvious. They need to be able to roam outside of, let's say, a small regional area. For instance, let's just assume this regional carrier is in Wisconsin, and the so Orange is Wisconsin, and certainly they want to be able to sell service, or I should say they want their customers to be able to travel outside of Wisconsin. So that's where they have roaming relationships with AT&T and T-Mobile, and these companies also respond by enjoying the ability for their devices when they're in at potential remote parts of the state to have coverage that they would not have previously had. So roaming is something that makes the cellular networks work. The problem is permanent roaming. Temporary roaming is okay, but permanent roaming tends to be a problem because that type of roaming is not allowed. So what it means as far as not being allowed, then there's not being allowed, and then there's being enforced. And for a long period of time, these types of roaming relationships were not really enforced to prevent against permanent roaming. But nowadays, that is getting more and more prevalent, and we'll touch on that and the reasons why in just a moment. But when a manufacturer really talks about having a single SIM that works on AT&T and T-Mobile magically at the same time, what they're really saying is we have a regional carrier's SIM, and its ability to be on AT&T and T-Mobile's network permanently effectively is a breach of the roaming agreement. Now, like I said, that hasn't been typically policed that closely, but times are changing, and they're changing specifically because of the 2G sunset. During routine audits, it's pretty easy through a routine audit to be able to determine if this type of roaming agreement is being violated and a regional carrier is improperly using a network for permanent roaming purposes. And when that's happened, it's pretty easy to fix. What they do is they just turn off all the devices that are permanently roaming. When that happens, you're going to permanently lose devices. And the important part to recognize with this is that those devices, it doesn't matter if they're 2G or if they're 3G or 4G, they're gone, period. Now, one of the benefits, certainly, that's often talked about, yeah, I have a regional carrier SIM, but it gives me both AT&T and T-Mobile's network. The problem is that it's still a roaming relationship, and with GSM refarming, it's becoming very critical for these national carriers to monitor GSM roaming behavior. And the reason is they want to leave as much capacity in that 2G network as they're refarming it and shrinking it. They want to leave enough capacity so that their paying customers have access to the network. What they're finding and what they're going to find as they do this and they go through this process, they find out we want to refine these down for our paying customers, but we can't get it to the level we need to because of all these customers that don't pay, all of these regional carrier guys that are permanently roaming on our network. And as this starts to take place and as we start getting into this phase of the sunset of refarming, we're going to see more and more of these roaming relationships being very closely monitored and trued up. And when that happens, ultimately, you're going to have the situation of a double sunset. You're going to lose one carrier from a roaming relationship. When you lose the second nationwide carrier, you better hope that all of your devices, in this case, are sitting in Wisconsin, because that will be the only state where they'll operate. That's why I think as companies are making this choice, to be aware of the difference between a single SIM that offers multiple carriers, because that is a regional SIM, and the importance of working with national carriers. Now, it's not just Telguard. We obviously work with AT&T, but there are many other of our competitors out there that have national carrier deals. So I encourage you to look closely when you're making your selection as to which carrier and which, not so much as which carrier, to make sure that you are at least working with a national carrier. And the fingerprint of not working with a national carrier is this statement: I have a SIM that works with multiple carriers. That statement is a clear indication that it's a regional carrier's SIM. Now that we've got the basis, it's kind of a quick recap of all these different topics. First, we kind of learned the difference between 3G, 4G. The longevity is identical. It's simply a hardware cost difference that is involved. The next we went through finding the sweet spot and understanding that that 3G longevity is really, and cost is really a good sweet spot. We understand that the sunset is absolutely happening. The date is December 31st, 2016. Nothing operates past that date. And we also understand that the FCC is very likely not going to be riding to anyone's rescue. We also now know the importance of national carrier relationships versus regional carrier relationships. But that's all about choices and understanding what's happening with the cellular network and the choices that you're going to have to make as it relates to technology moving forward, and the fact that you must now plan on moving forward. What we're going to be talking about now is some strategies that Telguard has about, and in particular Telguard and other applications of being able to try to avoid the impact of the 2G sunset. just to frame the actual impact, though, is the SDM 100. SDM does a good job of cataloging all these top security companies and their different financial and customer and and all sorts of statistics with that. Well, we have a calculator that's been pretty well vetted by some of these top companies that estimates the actual impact to their business of the actual 2G sunset. And so after running all these companies through this calculator, something just kept coming up. It almost always was that in the month of the sunset, or excuse me, in the year of the sunset, the cost of the sunset would be approximately 1 month of the RMR for the company. There was a lot of strong correlation to that. So it makes it easier to kind of make this statement then to everyone, regardless of your company size. And that is basically this. In 2016, if you do not proactively address the fact that you have 2G units installed and potentially are continuing to install 2G units, you are going to turn 2016 from a 12-month revenue year into an 11-month revenue year. It's that simple. I've had this slide now since January, and every time I run this presentation and talk to different audiences, we keep moving the arrow along through the year. And the reason is that it keeps growing. And so those that were wise enough in January to make the switch to 3G or 4G, they were able to make that 3G, 4G switch then. They stopped their impact and tapped it at the 1 month of RMR. Now we're here in August, and the impact keeps growing and growing and growing. So for some of you out there, you're now looking at turning 2016 into a 10.5-month RMR year because of the growth. Now you may be wondering, where does that growth come from? Well, it's plain and simple. When you install a 2G unit, because the sunset is within the horizon of its operational life, you are definitely going to be paying for a truck roll to replace that unit, and you're going to have to buy a new piece of hardware to actually conduct the replacement. The growth of this curve is directly related to the volume of business that you continue to do with 2G devices. So we at Telguard really set our mind on trying to break these barriers to adoption of 3G and 4G. The first thing that we did is we wanted to break the habit of installing 2G, and we did that by simply and quietly changing all of our products, or beginning the process to convert all of our products to 3G, 4G technology. So we no longer manufacture 2G products. So our customers who have the habit of buying our products were automatically being protected in this transition. The second thing that we needed to do was really break down that barrier of price. You all know, and we know, that cost is a huge factor and will always be, people will look for the cheapest option. And if 2G was priced significantly less or just less than 3G or 4G options, that would be a problem. We're definitely proud to say that we really kept the mantra and held close to the fact that we wanted to keep our new products equal to the price of our prior 2G products. And now that some other competitive products are coming on the market, we're seeing that we are still a good 20% less than competitive 3G and 4G products that are coming out. So on price, we think we addressed that barrier. But one of the new things that we're doing, I think the last barrier is this one of procrastination. I think it's probably the more difficult one for people to get over. I think now that AT&T has an official date announced, that should make it a little bit more, a little bit easier for people to not procrastinate as much. But we decided to put a program in place to counteract potential procrastination. And so just a real quick presentation of that. I won't spend a tremendous amount of time on it, but you can definitely go to this URL at the bottom, telguard.com/upgrade, and learn more details there about it. But effectively, what this program allows you to do is to replace any manufacturer's 2G unit with a Telguard unit, and we will pay you $25 per replaced unit. It's a very simple process. We have self-addressed and postage-paid cards that you will take the 2G SIM out of the old unit as a proof of replacement. You'll attach it to a little adhesive area on the card. You'll simply check the box of any of the manufacturers that you replaced that SIM belonged to. You give us the serial number of the unit you just replaced it with and drop it in a mailbox. When we receive it, we will credit your account, if you're a security dealer on the line here, up to $25. It's a very simple program, and we're proud to say that we have many of these things rolling in every day now. So let's look at really quick, those of you who may be thinking, I hear what they're saying, but I'm still going to be proactive. I'm still going to be a reactive type of a guy as it relates to the sunset. So let me frame what that really means. And that's this. You can certainly procrastinate and ignore the growing problem of the 2G installations that are being installed. That's certainly possible. But when the 2G sunset occurs, and depending on the vendor, that basically could be on December 31st of 2016, or I should say on New Year's Day, all of your customers are going to call you because they no longer have cellular service. You're now going to be aware of what's going on probably, but for many people in the industry, they're going to be driving out and investigating the problem with an estimated truck roll cost of $100. You're going to figure out, oh, it's because the cell unit no longer works. You're then going to go and buy a new cell unit, and then you're going to have to schedule another visit to come in and replace the call. So you're going to be looking at up to at least $350 or so just to replace that cellular unit. But here's the kicker. You're going to have to be doing all of these simultaneously. Everything is going to go out at the same time. And if that's the case, your customer is also going to be very possibly days without having any type of protection or service. This is the impact of being reactive to a sunset. Being proactive with this upgrade incentive program could absolutely turn it around, and done properly could be free. And this is how you do it. On your existing routine maintenance calls, you have 4.5 years of routine maintenance calls and visits with your customers. On one of those, when you're out there on an existing call, so there's no additional cost for that call as it relates to the sunset, you simply sell them or upgrade them to a new 3G Telguard communicator. With that, if you can sell it for around $99, under $100, which, by the way, you can add interactive services and things like that with the unit as a reason to upgrade, that combined with the upgrade incentive pretty much nets the entire transaction out to $0 for yourself. And ultimately, when the 2G sunset occurs, there's nothing to do. Over the past 4 years, you've already fully replaced all of your units, and you can keep 2016 as a 12-month revenue year and have addressed the replacement issues that are going to come over the upcoming 4.5 years. So you can be very proactive at that. And I'll go to say that if you're unable to upsell them, your customers, with a $99 upgrade to newer technology, it still makes sense that while you're there on that call, simply do the replacement yourself. You take the cost of the replacement, because the $99 will be easily paid back by avoiding future truck rolls and lost service that those customers will be potentially deactivating and looking for some sort of compensation for the period of time that they don't have service after the sunset. Okay, so that's the new content and new information. Steve and I are now going to be available to start taking your calls. I'm going to open up the panel here, so give me a moment so I can start seeing some of these questions. I don't know that we covered it, but if you do have questions on the GoToMeeting panel, would definitely recommend that the listeners can just simply go in and type in your questions. I'll wait here for a couple questions to come in. It's the panel. If you go down, it's the panel. Okay. Wait for those. All right. So just pause here a moment, make sure that we have everything set up for those that come in. Okay, let's see. We have one here. I'm going to try to. So we do have someone apparently is from my alma mater, so I will say yes, go Mississippi College as well here. So here we have a question here on the topic of the what is this? It says on the sunset is if it will actually be an event that will take place simultaneously exactly on that date from AT&T. Is that AT&T's plan, Steve?
Yes. Yes, our plan is, as Sean said, we'll be refarming spectrum over the next 4 years. But actually on January 1st, 2017, we will be shutting down the entire 2G network nationwide and no longer supporting that technology.
All right, good. Looking for more questions here. All right, we have one here. Does the upgrade program actually give everyone $25 each? Yes. So on the upgrade program, I'll step back to that slide here so you can see it. It is up to $25. There are some of our accounts will actually get $12.50. It's cleared out in the terms and conditions listed here as to who that lower amount might apply to. But pretty much by and large, the vast number of our customers and future customers will all be eligible for the full $25. That's right. All right. Okay, we have another question here on the claim forms. Okay, yes. Okay, the upgrade topic is a popular one. So for the claim forms, where you can get those forms, actually, they will be inside of all Telguard products, but you can also, if you're replacing an existing product that's in the field, because it is available for any manufacturer, you can do that by just visiting your distributor. There should be stacks of the claim forms available at any of your security distribution outlets. So that will be where you can find those forms. Okay. Try to carry a couple more questions. Oh, we have a couple more here. Okay, good. There was some hiding that I couldn't see. So there was a question about getting a copy of the presentation. That is absolutely going to be available. It will be available on the ESA's website, and I'll let Jacqueline talk about that as we close in a little while, but not right now. And there's another question here about whether or not this can be re-listened to at a later date. That's absolutely the case. We are recording this one, and it will also be available on the ESA website. There's another question here about the expecting that future upgrades could be flash upgradable. Unfortunately, that's not going to be the case for any manufacturer, Telguard included. We have in this case, what ends up happening is the actual piece of hardware that is physically installed is not capable of the software and the radio algorithms that it needs to talk to 3G. It's actually the silicon in the chip that is unable to connect to the network. So unfortunately, when the sunset comes along, in the device, in pretty much any device other than the recent Telguards that have been installed, if it was a 2G or GSM-based device, it will have to be physically replaced. Now, in some cases, that may be a simple board replacement, but in other cases, that will be perhaps the full unit. I can say that for some of our, I would say, more expensive commercial units, we are providing an upgrade kit that will be available this coming month, where you can simply do hardware swap of the internal board and still remain UL compliant for both fire and commercial systems. It is a question here about where Telguard products are distributed and or whether they're available for direct purchase. Our products are not available for direct purchase. They are only available through security distributors, and pretty much you pick your favorite distributor. You asked specifically about ADI, but Triad, ADI, Alarm, Max, SGI, all these different, pretty much any distributor of security products will carry Telguard products. The incentive amount is, oh, yeah, so I think a point of clarification, we have a TAP dealer program, we call it the Telguard Advantage program, that offers a 5% discount already on our hardware to the members. The $25 amount of the that we had talked about with the incentive program is actually in addition to the 5% discount. That is true. Where, again, can I receive a copy of this webinar? That is going to be on the ESA website after, and that will be kind of broadcast. And I'll send an uplink because obviously it's a common question. I'm going to send this out to everyone who have joined and you've listened today. I'll make sure that I send a broadcast out to everyone following up with the actual exact location of the webinar. So someone talking about I'll just read this specifically. I have a customer that is estimating a cost of $1.8 million to convert all of their cell backup units from 2G to 3G, 4G. My customer is planning to budget this for the year 2014-15 to spread the cost over 2 years. I think that's a very wise move and certainly a great idea because now with the known time frame, it's best to start working with your customers that have that type of purchasing ability to go ahead and plan the full spread of their replacement. And by the way, I don't know how many units are under 1.8 million, but get that down to a unit number and multiply it by 25, and we'd certainly like to talk to you about it because we have a check for you too. Will Tellular use any carrier other than AT&T since this is a business decision? No, because we see this as the decision moving forward for us isn't about AT&T or T-Mobile. It's a business decision by AT&T, but it's one that's also right now being made by every other cellular carrier. So I guess, unfortunately, maybe the downside for us as an industry is that almost all of our units and Telguards and all of our competitors, many of those are all using AT&T as their network. So it's an impact to us because of their because of the sunset. However, I guess the bright side, if there is one to this, is that because they've made that change first, their new technology will be around the longest. So the 3G, 4G network that we're going to be moving to and that our new products are operating on is certainly planned to be in full operation from now through easily into the deep 2020s, into late 2020s at least. So from our perspective, it's better to just go ahead and make the change to AT&T's newest network rather than jumping from this network onto, say, a T-Mobile network whose sunset is tentatively, I guess, being discussed as something around the 2020 timeframe. So from our standpoint, it's better to just, as a company, for us to move quickly to the next technology that gives our customers the longest possible life. So a follow-up question, I guess it's two questions. Unfortunately, the gentleman who was just talking about the huge number of units that had to be replaced was concerned that they are having units affected at this time as they have had them fail during the harvesting period. And this is exactly the point of why we talk about the fact that it isn't that the sunset's in at the end of 2016. It's the fact that the harvesting is happening now, and as cellular frequencies are being moved around, devices that worked great today may not work tomorrow. Literally tomorrow they may not work. And the reason is as AT&T and T-Mobile, and they start to move their frequencies and what's available around, they might move from a deep building penetrating frequency to a shallow building penetrating frequency, at which point the signal strength of the installed unit could suddenly drop. So it is a definite concern and one that is absolutely happening. In fact, I think folks in Phoenix and some other in New York may be acutely experiencing these types of issues, in my opinion. So they were wondering about, I guess there was just wanted, because it's such a I guess a big topic right now out there about the longevity of the HSPA versus that of HSPA plus. Steve, I might hand the phone over to you and ask you to specifically kind of just drive home the point that from AT&T's perspective, and honestly from any logical technologist perspective, these technologies are inseparable.
Yes, thanks, Sean. Yes, as Sean mentioned, our 3G platform, it's a separate architecture that supports UMTS, HSPA, HSPA+. That is all built on the same architecture today, and really it's a function of what radio do you have when you attach to our 3G architecture. If you have an HSPA radio, you will achieve those speeds. If you have an HSPA+ radio, which is a bit more expensive, you'll achieve higher speeds. But today, everything is built on the same architecture, and it's strictly the type of radio that's attaching that's going to determine the speeds that you get out of that. You know, I can't really speculate on the future, but typically the architecture is architecture, so we build it out and we allow any 3G technologies to attach to it. So I can't really, you know, the fact that HSPA+, they really are inseparable. It's the same architecture hardware. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I hope that answered the question more specifically. So how important is it to receive the 2G unit back from the customer? Can it be recycled for future use of some sort? Well, we, in our upgrade program, we are only interested in that small little piece of plastic, the SIM card, as it relates to this program. As it relates to the residual value of the piece of hardware, there may be recycling centers or something like that that might be able to take advantage of it, but on a unit-by-unit basis, it pretty much would be like just something you'd probably just throw away, honestly. I'm not clear about the frequencies being used by existing 2G versus 3G, LTE, and etc. Concern is building and foliage attenuation. Well, it really, for most on-street level of coverage, any of these frequencies that these products use are okay with that. It's really not at the frequency ranges that get attenuated heavily by foliage. LTE, just for clarity, LTE is commonly deployed at the 700 megahertz band, although it is being deployed in a couple of other frequency bands, but primarily at 700. And then 2G, 3G, this is deployed in 850, 850, and 1900. But all those frequencies are, honestly, the lower penetrates the deepest. So LTE ultimately will be, at 700 megahertz at least, will be a very deep penetrating type of capability, technology. All right, so another question here. What is the so-called 2.5G that AT&T refers to in their press release? I think I can answer this one quickly. Okay. It's Edge. Right. So Edge was remember my gear shifter, right? So if you were to look at GSM's gear shifter, my analogy in using the gear shifter, that was the 3G gear shifter. But if you looked over, into the GSM world and looked at their gear shifter, they had two gears, right? They had GPRS and they had Edge. And they're also inseparable. That's a very good point. So so just like HSPA and HSPA+, so goes GSM, GPRS, and Edge. When GPRS and GSM go away, so does Edge. And Edge was simply called 2.5G. Actually, before T-Mobile renamed HSPA+, 4G, many people actually referred to that technology branch as 3.5G. Answer that one. Okay, during a few meetings of the AICC, it was discussed if 2G devices would be backwards workable. I take it that this would be not the case, at least not through AT&T. And I guess Shane asked the question here, and Shane, it's not just AT&T. It goes back to the question I answered a couple of minutes ago. This is the technology. It's just how it's going to happen. It's not about a carrier versus another carrier. It's about the actual physical chipset that's inside of our products and all cellular products. It's just like you couldn't go back in time and find an analog phone and dig it out of the trash and pull out one of those big brick phones and stare at it and hope that it would somehow magically become capable of GSM or 3G. The reason it can't is a totally different technology. The exact same thing applies to the move from 2G technology to 3G technology. Covered this already. There are some questions in here that are regarding competitors specifically. I'm going to try to stay away from answering too many of those specifically, but I'm going to kind of do maybe a summary where I don't talk about a specific competitor, but make it a little bit more general. So just give me a moment to kind of sum a couple of these up. So I'll just name your name, Richard N. You asked a question regarding a competitor's, specific competitor's product. I will tell you the answer to that is no at the time. Sorry. Then there's a question, do any of the DSE GSM 3060s get credit for the upgrade? Yes, any manufacturer's products will get credit for the upgrade. You simply need to remove the SIM inside the device, put it on the claim form, and mail it to us with after you've activated its Telguard 3G replacement, and you will get credit. How long will 3G, 4G be around? That's not a question that really anybody can answer with any type of specificity, but AT&T currently has no plans to turn down or do anything different with the 3G network. And I'll tell you, here's a little aside on why 3G. You can kind of rest assured that 3G, 4G, that this HSPA-based network is going to be around for a while. And that is that new technology, LTE. Those frequencies are not global. There's not a common place globally for LTE devices to interoperate. They're very much going to be regionally specific, work in the U.S. and Canada maybe and things like that, but you're not going to be able to go from Europe with an LTE device and come to the U.S. with an LTE device. There's 17, yeah, so Steve just mentioned here, there are 17 different frequencies available, okay? So there's not, in the 3G, 4G world, globally there are only 5. And so most radios are built to be able to find and use those 5 frequencies so that you can travel internationally when you use a 3G, 4G device, but you can't if you were to have a 4G LTE device. So think of it this way. If the world wants to carry cell phones across geographic borders, they're going to have a 3G, 4G network available in that country, period. And that won't be the case with LTE. So it's something that I like to hear because I am more, I guess, I feel better about the ultimate longevity of this network, given that in order for global commerce to continue, these networks need to be up until there's a suitable and better replacement, which does not exist at this time. Actually, I should say, doesn't exist and really hasn't even been invented. So I'm going to clear off that question here. That's another question about, that was how long will it be around. I answered that one. You know, it's a question about how much better products are in the rural versus urban areas as it relates to HSPA coverage. I'll say that AT&T, I believe Steve, you can agree that your build out is you're planning on almost having a one-to-one relationship by the end of 2013.
Yeah, by the end of 2013, at the latest, we will have overlaid 3G, HSPA, HSPA Plus over where every place where 2G is today.
Yeah, so on a build out for one-to-one, we should have for users of AT&T's network one-to-one correlation by the end of this year. For as it relates to maybe some other technologies like Verizon and things like this, I'll give you kind of another answer, which would be we at Telguard, we actually have a sister company called TankLink, and that company monitors devices in very remote areas. And we actually have both CDMA and 3G products in that for that product line. We find that in 99.9% of the cases that GSM coverage is everywhere we need it to be, and only possibly in the most far remote areas might there be a chance that CDMA might exist where our 3G network or 3G/2G network wouldn't be available. So I'll tell you that from our point of view, coverage even out into the rural areas, it hasn't been a big issue. Mountainous areas, I know some of you are probably from North Carolina or thinking about that. Yes, mountains do cause problems, but as far as typical general rural areas, that's not that big of an issue. Okay. You've heard this already, learned that. So there's a question that's like, there's a manufacturer who all of their units are 2G. Is there a way I can tell by looking at this manufacturer's device if my devices from AT&T are 2, 3, or 4G? Actually, there's a way you can do it today that you can tell if a device that is installed is 2G or if it's 3G, 4G. You're going to love this answer. Does it have a Telguard logo on it? If it doesn't have a Telguard logo on it, it is not 3G or 4G. Because we are the first. We launched our first product in September of last year. We've been pretty much only selling 3G products for a couple of months now, and only now are we hearing the recent announcements from some of our competition of having 3G, 4G type products available. So I don't want to get into the specifics of the one company that you're asking about, Harry, but I'll tell you that that would be a very easy way that I think you could identify if something has even the chance at being a 3G, 4G device. There's a question about how often sunsets might occur and when they might be, if there's a 3 to 4 year cycle. I can only, AT&T really doesn't have an official type comment on that, but I'll point you back to the statement I made earlier, which is the technology that's in place now is 3G, 4G, HSPA-based technology. It is global, and is the only solution for global interoperability. The newest technology, 4G LTE, is not an option for that. Thus, I think it's very safe to assume that the 3G, 4G HSPA-based network that AT&T, and just that technology base in general, is something that's going to be around for a very long time. There's a question about donating the use of these old units for phone cards for the soldiers. Maybe a question about that. Unfortunately, the hardware that's in these products, as we said, they really don't have residual value, and they actually cannot be used as phones themselves. So unfortunately, kind of a donation programs or things like that really won't be an option. Will a 3G, 4G unit work on a 2G tower if it is currently the only signal available? That is absolutely the case. When we say a 3G, 4G unit, it always means the lower technologies as well. So it's really a 2G, 3G, 4G unit, and that's true of every single device in the world as it relates to HSPA. They all have the ability to fall back to GSM. And if so, will the unit automatically? Yes. And then so the other half of that question was, will it automatically move forward and use the newest signal, the latest generation of 3G, 4G if it detects it? That is also true. Actually, it will choose the best signal in the area. Okay, it doesn't automatically go to 3G, 4G. If a 2G signal is in the area and it is a pristine signal, it'll use it as long as it's available. But most commonly, the strongest signal in an area will actually be the 3G signal. So there's a couple of thanks, and look for coverage maps. As far as coverage maps on a, how do we identify which NG? Okay, so two final questions here. Unfortunately, one of these I can't, is the question that we really can't address here. So maybe a private follow-up or something like that might be available. But on the last three questions that we have, the question was, do we have a map of the 2G coverage right now? I will simply say that for us and any cellular carrier, you can go to their website and determine the most up-to-date coverage map. Those coverage maps indicate two things. One will say requires a 3G, 4G capable handset. When it has that type of distinction, that means you have to have a 3G, 4G device or it will not operate. That means GSM is not there. And then also they will have networks showing edge coverage, and then sometimes they'll say voice coverage or some other things. But pretty much you can see 3G, 4G coverage areas on any of the carriers' sites. Another kind of interesting thing that you can do, just so you know, is our TG1 Express costs $125, and that product, you can put a 9-volt battery into that and simply use it as a coverage tester. You don't have to have an active service account with us. You simply put a battery in the TG1 Express, and there's a button on the side. You can press it, and you can see what the signal level is with the actual product you're going to install. So it's kind of a neat little trick that you can use for that. And the last thing is, how can you identify which generation is of an installed Telguard device specifically? And for that, I'll tell you that the model number is the key. If it ends in 004, that means it is a 3G, 4G unit, for all products except for the TG1 Express. And for the TG1 Express, if it ends in 003, that means it is a 3G, 4G unit. Any other model numbers will be 2G at this time. Okay, well, it looks like we're ending right on time. I appreciate everyone's time and also the numerous thank yous that came in through the question interface. And with that, I'm going to turn the call back over to you, Jacqueline, and you can close things up.
Great. Thanks so much, Sean and Steve, for the informative content. We really appreciate it. Again, I'd like to remind everyone that a recording of the webinar and a copy of the PowerPoint will be available shortly in the online resource library at esaweb.org, which can be located under the resource header and then followed by the members only resources option. A member login will be required, so if you need further assistance, please contact the ESA Member Service Center and we'll be happy to assist you there. That number is 972-807-6800. Again, the ESA Member Service Center, 972-807-6800. And once again, thanks for participating in today's webinar sponsored by Telguard. We appreciate your time and hope you found the content useful, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.